Now, isn't it fascinating to think about where things begin? Take English drama, for instance. Before the grand theatres and the celebrated playwrights we know and love, there were simpler forms of storytelling. People have always loved a good yarn, haven't they? And what better way to tell a yarn than to act it out, to give it voice and movement, to bring characters, however rudimentary, to life before an eager audience. The very earliest stirrings of what we might recognise as drama in England were often tied up with religion. Think of the church, the dominant force in medieval life. Bible stories, lives of saints, moral lessons, these were the blockbusters of their day, if you will, performed initially within the church itself, sometimes by the clergy. These little enactments were designed to educate and inspire a largely illiterate populace. Gradually, these performances began to move. They shifted from the solemnity of the church interior to the slightly more boisterous churchyard, and then, quite excitingly, out into the public squares and marketplaces. While the core messages often remained religious or moral, the introduction of more secular elements began to creep in. A touch of humour here, a bit of everyday life there. The seeds of a distinctively English theatre were being sown, watered by popular appeal and the sheer joy of performance. The stage was quite literally being set for the arrival of the first true English comedy and tragedy. Before we can truly appreciate the arrival of the first English comedy and tragedy, it's rather illuminating to peek at what came before. Consider the miracle plays, for example. These were grand affairs, often performed by town guilds on impressive mobile stages called pageant wagons. Each guild would take responsibility for a particular biblical story: Noah and the flood, the nativity, the crucifixion. Then there were the morality plays, which took a slightly different, more allegorical tack. Instead of biblical figures, you'd have characters like everyman, good deeds, fellowship and vice. These weren't so much about historical events as they were about the human condition, the struggle between good and evil for a person's soul. And let's not forget the interludes. These were shorter, often funnier pieces, typically performed indoors, perhaps in the great halls of nobles or colleges during a break in a feast or some other entertainment. They were less overtly religious than the miracle or morality plays, often featuring witty dialogue, comic situations, and characters drawn from everyday life, or at least recognizable types. These interludes were crucial in developing comedic timing and snappy dialogue, skills that would be essential for the comedies to come. So you see, the ground was well and truly prepared. The allure of the first. It's a label we humans are terribly fond of, isn't it? The first man on the moon, the first to climb Everest, the first to invent the self-stirring teacup. A truly noble endeavour, that one. For our purposes, when we talk about the first English comedy or tragedy, we're generally looking for plays that mark a conscious departure from the purely religious or allegorical framework of the miracle and morality plays. They are the pioneers who consciously or unconsciously set a new course for English drama. Now, let us turn our attention to the chap generally credited with penning the very first English comedy. His name was Nicholas Udall, and he was quite the clever clogs. A schoolmaster, no less, at Eton and later Westminster. And so sometime around 1552, though not published until a bit later, pranced onto the scene, and English theatre was never quite the same. The plot of is a delightful confection of mistaken intentions and comic vanity. Our hero, the eponymous Ralph, is a wonderfully puffed-up fellow, full of bluster and self-importance, yet utterly clueless. With his foolish boasting and inevitable comeuppance, set a precedent, opening the door for a whole tradition of English comedic writing. Following hot on the heels of, or perhaps even composed around a similar time as, though generally considered the second English comedy, is the wonderfully titled. The plot is simplicity itself, yet it generates an astonishing amount of comic chaos. The entire village, it seems, is thrown into an uproar because old Gammer Gurton has lost her precious sewing needle. The search for this tiny, elusive object escalates into a series of misunderstandings, false accusations, and even a bit of fisticuffs. The humour in is far more robust and less polite than that of. It's full of dialect, slapstick, and characters who are vividly, if broadly, drawn. The play culminates in a famously painful discovery. The needle is found when Hodge is pricked in the backside by it, having sat on it after it got stuck in his breeches. This play is significant because it demonstrates a different strand of early English comedy. It's less concerned with classical models and more interested in capturing the vernacular and the everyday concerns of ordinary country folk. With its focus on domestic squabbles and its unpretentious, hearty laughter, showed that English comedy could be diverse. While audiences were beginning to chuckle at the antics of boastful fools and needle-finders, another, altogether more serious dramatic form was making its presence felt on the English stage tragedy. Now, comedy, delightful as it is, often deals with the lighter side of human folly, usually ending with a marriage or a reconciliation. Tragedy, however, dons a darker cloak. It grapples with the profound, the painful, the often insoluble problems of human existence: fate, ambition, betrayal, suffering, and death. The inspiration for early English tragedy came largely from the Roman playwright Seneca. His tragedies, often based on Greek myths, were rather sensational affairs, filled with ghosts, gruesome murders, high-flown rhetoric, and a pervasive sense of doom. The emergence of English tragedy was a crucial step in the development of a mature national drama, one that could encompass the full spectrum of human experience. And so we arrive at the play widely acknowledged as the first true English tragedy, also known rather more descriptively by its alternative title. This sombre piece was penned by two rather distinguished gentlemen, Thomas Norton and Thomas Sackville. It was first performed for Queen Elizabeth I herself at the Inner Temple during the Christmas festivities of 1561. The plot of is a grim and cautionary tale. The aging King Gorbodue of ancient Britain decides, against the advice of his wise counsellors, to divide his kingdom between his two sons, Ferrex and Porrex, during his own lifetime. This, as any student of King Lear will tell you, is generally not a recipe for peace and harmony. Sure enough, sibling rivalry rears its ugly head. The ambitious Porrex, fearing his brother's supposed plots, kills Ferrex. Their mother, Queen Vidina, who favoured Ferrex, goes into a vengeful rage and murders Porrex in his sleep. The horrified populace, aghast at this royal bloodbath, rises up and kills both Gorbodue and Videna. The kingdom then descends into civil war and chaos, with no clear heir to the throne. What makes so groundbreaking, apart from its rather bleak subject matter, is its form. These early plays weren't just interesting historical curiosities. They were genuine innovators, bringing new techniques and approaches to the English stage. One of the most significant adoptions, largely from classical precedent, was the formal 5-act structure. This provided a clear framework for developing a plot, rising through complications to a climax, and then moving towards a resolution, whether comic or tragic. Then there's the monumental introduction of blank verse by Norton and Sackville. Blank verse, that unrhymed iambic pentameter, offered a powerful new tool. It had the poetic elevation suitable for lofty themes and royal characters, but it also possessed a flexibility that could accommodate more naturalistic speech patterns. Characterization also took a leap forward. While many characters in these early plays still leaned towards being types, they were beginning to show more individual traits and psychological depth than the purely allegorical figures of the morality plays. And let's not forget the simple act of writing these plays entirely in English and doing so with conscious artistry. They provided the foundational grammar and vocabulary, so to speak, for the extraordinary flourishing of drama that was to follow in the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras. It's a rather lovely thought, isn't it, that great achievements rarely spring from a vacuum. Even the most towering geniuses, your Shakespeares and your Marlowes, were standing on the shoulders of those who came before. The pioneering efforts of Udall, the mysterious Mr. S., Norton and Sackville in crafting these early comedies and tragedies were absolutely vital. They tilled the soil, planted the seeds, and showed what was possible. They created a theatrical environment in which later, perhaps greater talents could flourish. Without, and would the path to Shakespearean comedy have been quite so clear? Perhaps not. These foundational plays did more than just provide entertainment for their contemporary audiences. They established English as a viable, powerful language for dramatic expression. They experimented with form, with verse, and with character, creating templates and raising questions that subsequent playwrights would eagerly take up and explore with even greater sophistication. Think of the sheer explosion of theatrical activity that occurred in the later 16th and early 17th centuries. The building of permanent playhouses, the rise of professional acting troupes, and the emergence of a constellation of brilliant playwrights. It was a golden age. This remarkable efflorescence didn't just happen by chance. It was built upon the groundwork laid by these earlier, perhaps less polished, but no less important plays.
Hey there! If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to stay updated with all my latest content, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update.